I genuinely believe, even though it's brief and suggestive, his handling of the love story between Eowyn and Faramir is as delicate and stunning as any love story in Western literature. So I'll
Wow.
say that there'll be scoffers. I don't care. I'm
Yeah,
happy to
I
defend
think
anybody who wants to. It's just the way that it develops. The only comparison I can think of, um, but lacking in something of the gravity of Tolkien's telling, is in the best of Jane Austen.
turning to the plunge, my friend Landon Loftin, scholar, professor, and extraordinary person, I believe. So, Landon, after that intro, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm really glad to be back. I enjoyed it last time, and I've really enjoyed listening ever since. I've done
Oh,
some great conversations.
well, I have to publicly thank you, as I have privately, because it's your network of friends who make up a good percentage of the guests for this series. So thank you for extending yourself and making an introduction on my behalf. Well, your character is a beloved character, and I'd love for you to tell us who you chose and why.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, first, I'd like to tell you about how I came to know Tolkien. So
That'd be great.
I've been reading Tolkien my whole life, and ever since well, not my whole life, ever since I was a serious reader, I've been reading Tolkien. And I encountered Tolkien for the first time when I was quite young, because the films came out when I was quite young. I'm still young enough that I was still a kid. But I watched the films, and they led me to the books. I've always loved books. The happiest and best memories of my life, if I were to make a list of them, a large proportion of them would include literary experiences. And I don't want to sound hyperbolic, but The Lord of the Rings is one of maybe 4 or 5 books that I could name that have brought me as close to perfect ecstasy as anybody can reasonably hope to come this side of the grave. I just, there, there, there are these memories I have of reading Lord of the Rings, and not just for the first time, where I just felt like my whole life had turned a corner, like I'd seen the whole world in a new and different way. And, um, but I have to admit, it's a little bit embarrassing, actually. My first real encounter with Tolkien was cinematic, not literary. And again, because I was quite young when the movies came out, and my dad took a friend and I to the movie theater to see it. And when it was over, when the first one was over, that's when I started reading them. And that's because I couldn't wait however long it was until the second movie came out. And I have complicated feelings about the films, as many people do, who love Tolkien, but they were very important for me, and the music and some of the imagery still is always with me when I read, because I encountered that first, and in many ways I think that does enrich my reading of the books. But I
Yeah,
chose.
I sorry, I was going to say my wife had the same experience. We were newly married at the
uh,
time, and she had not read any Tolkien. And going to the first film Christmas time, and then each successive Christmas, it regardless of the limitations of the medium and Peter Jackson's, good, bad, and indifferent, it brought it back to the hearts and minds of a whole new audience. So I think on the whole, it was a positive.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Um, well, one thing about the films, they portray my favorite character in a way in which I have a few qualms with, and we won't go there. But that is Faramir, and that's who I thought we might talk about today. From my first reading of The Two Towers, I knew Faramir was my favorite character, and it would be hard for me to really say what it is that I find so compelling about him. But as I thought about it before this conversation, I thought there's kind of a shorter personal answer and a longer impersonal answer, and you can tell me which one you want, but I can
I,
justify why I think Faramir is the greatest.
I would love both, to be honest. I think we have time for that if you do.
Great. Yeah. So the first answer, the shorter, more personal answer, is just that uh, Faramir, he's always inspired me because he embodies a lot of ideals that that I would like to embody myself, and maybe someday will embody myself. And those are not just the sort of grand abstract ideals, but they have to do with particular aspects of my personality and experience. And I could give you a lot of examples, but I'll just give you one where two of my convictions or core feelings about the world are united in a couple of statements that Faramir makes. So one thing to know about me, I've always loved animals as long as I can remember. I have this deep love and sympathy for non-human creatures, and it's always something that I've felt not many people share. They might like animals insofar as they're cute or convenient or interesting, but I've just always felt this deep sympathy with animals of various kinds, and I can't really bear to see them mistreated. That's always been I have early experiences as a very little kid of feeling very angry or very sad at the mistreatment of animals. And that, in addition to that, something seemingly totally disconnected. I've always had this conviction that not just that we should speak truthfully. I mean, all decent people think that we should, in general, tell the truth and not tell lies, but that direct, open, sincere conversation is always preferable to the inane small talk or the little social games that we play so that we don't step on each other's toes. But I feel like those keep us from really understanding each other and from really deriving the things that I value in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I read Faramir, I just remember thinking, man, I love this guy. So here's some quotes where he brings these things together, these things that I thought were totally idiosyncratic, to me. Certainly they're not. As you grow older, you find more people are like you, or at least are the way that you would like to be. That's the better way of putting it. But at one point, Faramir says to Frodo, he says, "I do not slay man or beast needlessly, and not gladly, even when it's needed, nor do I talk in vain." And then hearing this, Frodo, this is how Faramir wins Frodo's trust. He says, Frodo felt in his heart that Faramir, though he was much like his brother, Boromir, in looks, he was a man less self-regarding, both sterner and wiser. And earlier in the same sort of conversation, Faramir says things like, "I would not even snare an orc in a falsehood." And that line always stuck with me, even, like when I was like 16, I remember thinking about that. Like, Faramir's the best. He wouldn't even snare an orc in a falsehood. And then he also says later that we, men of Gondor, we are truth speakers. We boast seldom and then perform, or we die in the attempt. So, in addition to being cool and inspiring, I think Faramir is one of the most quotable characters in the book. He always has a sort of dignified pith to whatever he has to say. So that's the short personal answer of why I just think Faramir is really great, and the character that I think about most often when I'm not reading the books is Faramir.
Wow, such an paragon of nobility. Yeah. I'm curious if you'll provide the other reason why you think he's so great.
Yeah, so this one requires a little bit of explanation, so bear with me. And I'm not sure I can articulate it as well as I'd like, but there's this certain ideal that I find really compelling, and that there are multiple characters in The Lord of the Rings that embody it, but I don't think anybody does more obviously than Faramir. And to explain it, I'm going to have to go back to where I first encountered it, which is in the writings of G.K. Chesterton. And he argued that the virtues, human excellences, they're not so much found in an easy mean between two extremes. Like, that's the classical view, that it's the golden mean, between the two extremes. Mm-hmm. Courage is the mean between like recklessness and cowardice, right? But Chesterton said that it's actually a bit more subtle and a bit more extreme than that. And he said that the virtues are found in a violent collision and unexpected synthesis of opposite tendencies. So here's a passage where he applies this to courage. These are Chesterton's words. He says, "Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of readiness to die. He that will lose his life, the same shall save it, is not a piece of mysticism for saints and heroes. It is a piece of everyday advice for sailors or mountaineers. A soldier surrounded by enemies, if he is to cut his way out, needs to combine a strong desire for living with a strange carelessness about dying. He must seek his life in a spirit of furious indifference to it. He must desire life like water and yet drink death like wine." that's just, to me, that's classic
Exquisite.
Chesterton. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. But I encountered this in another place too, and this is where I'm going to make the link to Faramir. And having always had that idea from Chesterton in my mind, I read the essay "The Necessity of Chivalry" by C.S. Lewis, and he is commenting on Sir Thomas Malory's Arthurian legend, and Malory puts this quotation in the mouth of Sir Ector about Lancelot after Lancelot's death. It says, "Thou wert the meekest man that ever ate in hall among ladies, and thou wert the sternest knight in that mortal foe that ever put spear in the rest." And what's important for Lewis here, what he comments on in the essay, is that this is the chivalric ideal which puts a double demand on human nature. That is, in this case, the knight, he says, is a man of blood and iron, but he's also demure, almost maiden-like, as a guest in the hall, a gentle, modest, unobtrusive man. But, crucially, Lewis says, he is not a compromise or a happy mean between ferocity and meekness. He is fierce to the nth degree and meek to the nth degree. So I don't know if he had Chesterton in mind or if he's just drawing from the same literature that Chesterton was in coming to this insight that virtue, or at least I'd say certain virtues, not all, do have this, they do consist in like a dynamic collision. There's like a deeper synthesis between the outward tension of different characteristics or tendencies in a person. And so Lewis says, for this reason, insofar as we think of virtue this way, the virtuous person is a work of art, not of nature. Because naturally we tend to one thing or another. In this case, a man might tend toward the sternness and the sternness and the hardness of a warrior, or the meekness and the modesty of a civilized man. And so Lewis says the challenge here is to combine the opposites, and it doesn't just apply to the chivalric age. He sees in it an insight that's universally applicable. That there are ways in which we have to combine opposite tendencies in our nature rather than simply pick one or the other, and that's not an easy thing. So let me link to Faramir, and then we can move on. I think there's lots of ways in which Faramir embodies this, striking ways, and I'll just give one. He's clearly a work of art, not of nature, in that his character, it combines in a superficially confusing but fundamentally comprehensible way a number of virtues that don't go naturally together, and are not only, or not least, the ones that Malory has in mind regarding Lancelot. And crucially, we can think of Boromir and Denethor, his brother and his father, as having certain virtues that are not balanced by their opposites, whereas Faramir's are, which is what allows him to act wisely and justly where they both fail in their own way. So in The Lord of the Rings, Faramir is continually and convincingly described as being both a warrior with valor, courage, and fortitude. But as much as he's continually praised for these things, I think most readers come away with the impression that his most distinctive characteristics are really wisdom, gentleness, patience, justice, humility, sincerity, peaceableness. So those things don't go naturally together, right? But they do,
Right.
very convincing way in Faramir, which is, to me, a great testament to Tolkien's art. Just it's entirely convincing and yet implausible at the same time. So he always tells the truth. He speaks plainly and directly to everyone. He treats everyone, even Gollum, with justice, and not the kind of justice that excludes mercy, but like a merciful justice. And when he fights, he does so always for the sake of things that he loves, right? It's a great passage. I'm going to read it, and then we can move on. But this shows what I mean about gentleness and peaceableness and mercy being his defining characteristics, and yet a man greatly known as a warrior, a defender of Gondor. Faramir says, in talking to Frodo, he says, "For myself," said Faramir, "I would see the White Tower in flower again, in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace. Minas Anor, again and of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful, as a queen among other queens, not a mistress of many slaves, nay, not even a kind mistress of willing slaves. War must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness. nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of men of Numenor, and I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, her present wisdom, not feared save as men fear the dignity of a man old and wise. That's the long impersonal answer.
Well, it was worth the time, because it's such a compelling vision, as you say, perhaps unobtainable, but my goodness, or implausible, but it is just, again, as you remarked, to Tolkien's skill and in crafting this character to be believable. So I really appreciate the line that you shared from Lewis, I believe, that it's fierceness to the nth degree and meekness to the nth degree. And of course, that word meek, at least for me, brings back the depictions of the Christ. And so, as well as the fierceness, I mean, it really is in line with that nature, as we all strive to be.
Yeah, I think, even religious convictions put aside, a person who just looks at the text of the Gospels can see this furious combination of opposites. And that's part of what was in Chesterton's mind. He later goes on to talk about how Christianity, building off of the teachings of Christ, came to combine those in a way that the pagan world couldn't. And that's in his book, Orthodoxy. That's how he got to that conclusion.
Yeah. Well, like you, I've had many transcendent literary moments, and the deftness with which and the playfulness with which Chesterton wields the pen is always quite compelling. You mentioned his Faramir's wisdom and his bravery, but I'm curious, is there anything more you'd like to add in terms of that blend of scholar warrior type that he embodies?
Yeah. So he's described as a formidable warrior. He's admired across the realm of Gondor as second only to Boromir in his formidableness as a warrior, and a great captain of men, somebody that men will follow even to their deaths. He's also a lover of wisdom. He's described as being far-sighted, learned, a man known for discerning and speaking truth. And Baragond, the man who escorts Pippin around Gondor when Pippin's there and Gandalf's busy, he gets at this aspect of Faramir's character when he says that Faramir is bold, more bold than many deem. For in these days men are slow to believe that a captain can be wise and learned in the scrolls and of lore and song. And he is, and yet, a man of hardihood and swift judgment in the field. So again, there's the two opposites. And even Baragond's saying it's hard to believe that one man can combine these aspects of character, and yet Faramir does. So swift in judgment, but such is Faramir, less reckless and eager than Boromir, but not less resolute. So, while in one sense Faramir, he reminds people of the former glory of Numenor, he always, recalls to people's minds, and at one point Gandalf even says, by some chance the blood of Westernese runs nearly true in Faramir. At the same time, he doesn't really value the glory that comes from war, and the power that he has both as a warrior and as a guide and a captain to other warriors. So Sam also notes this about him. He says that Faramir has the air of a wizard. Faramir notes that Frodo's a hobbit, a halfling, and he's like, you're strange creatures, but there's something else about you. You have this elvish air, which a few people note in the book about Frodo. But then Sam says, you remind me of somebody. You remind me of maybe a little bit of Gandalf. You have the air of a wizard. And Gandalf himself seems to notice this about Faramir and admire it. And the other character who notices it is Denethor, and Denethor only brings it up to insult his son, his loyal but disfavored son.
Right.
So that's a fun story, but I'm sure we'll get to it. So it brings up the synthesis of opposites in that way. There's like the scholar and the warrior, the man of action, the man of contemplation, that are convincingly combined in a single person. But there's also another sense that's worth pointing out. Faramir loves knowledge. He seeks truth and understanding, and he reads lore and tries to discern rightly. And yet at the same time, he's one of the few characters who, when given the chance to get all the details about the ring, to gain all that knowledge about Frodo's quest, the moment he sees where it's going, he says, no more. I don't want to hear any more. I don't want to know. don't tell me, right? So he's curious in the intellectually virtuous sense, in that he's always seeking knowledge and understanding, and as a result has become wise. And yet he's the master of his own curiosity, and he knows the potential that it has to corrupt his own heart. And notice that his father's heart was corrupted through the seeking of knowledge, right? Through the Palantir, it drove him to despair because he was able to see truths that misled him into thinking the situation was different than it was. And so he pursued knowledge as his son Faramir pursues knowledge. And yet he did so in the wrong way, not having the prudence to say, some things are not for me to know. But Faramir was able to do that. And he said, as soon as he understood that Frodo was carrying a powerful heirloom and that he was fulfilling the quest of Gandalf, and that Gandalf had hoped that they would have complete secrecy, Faramir, he has Frodo in his power. He could find out anything he wants, and he's won Frodo's trust. But Faramir says, "No, enough. Don't even mention it again. Don't talk about it. I don't want to know. I'll just aid you in your quest, in trusting in your virtue and the wisdom of Gandalf, and send you on your way." So I think it's that another like combination of having that curiosity, the intellectually virtuous curiosity, and yet mastering his own curiosity and being willing to say, some knowledge is not for me, and therefore avoiding the despair that his father fell into.
Yeah, the self-restraint is quite impressive. As a person who's innately curious myself, I think we've talked about this a bit before with respect to technology and change. I can agree with that admonition that perhaps some things are best for me not to explore.
Left alone.
As Faramir takes up, his role and responsibility in the journey, would you speak perhaps to his role in the quest and his decision making in the nature and the fate of the ring?
Yeah. So Faramir is one of a handful of characters who's called upon to make choices upon which the entire quest depends. There's two choices that Faramir makes, and they're hard choices, and he made the ones that almost anybody else would have, they would have considered his choices folly. But in both ways, he's echoing the wisdom of Gandalf. And so when Sam says he sees something of Gandalf in him, I think Sam is discerning this affinity of their minds in this way. So the first one is obviously when Faramir and his men capture Frodo and Sam in the wilderness, and they're under a strict command to kill anybody who's not supposed to be there, and that they don't know who these people are, and they're halflings, they're hobbits, and they're unfamiliar with them, and they're dressed strangely and have strange things to say, and they're a little bit defensive and secretive, and he has every reason to make the choice to either keep them as prisoners or do something worse to them. But in fact, what he chooses to do is to listen very carefully to Frodo and to think very carefully before he makes a judgment. And in listening to Frodo, we see again his intelligence, keenness of understanding. He listens carefully to Frodo. He infers much more than Frodo says. And while he speaks skillfully, and then he comments Frodo on replying skillfully, he doesn't do it in order to deceive, but in order to discern the truth he needs for the judgment that he has to make. And so once he understood, again, that Frodo had some heirloom of great power and that he was working at the behest of Gandalf, he just decided to aid him in the quest and send him onward at great personal risk to himself, for if his choice proved ill, he says his own life would be forfeit. But even then, later, he finds out, what he didn't want to know, which is that this is about the ring, and that they're carrying the ring, and that they're taking it to Mordor. And even so, his judgment remains the same, even amidst grave concerns, not only about the quest itself, but about the guide who they've taken up to take them to Mordor, which is Gollum. And but he trusts in the wisdom of Gandalf and Elrond, the wisdom that they put forward in the council in commissioning the fellowship and setting the quest in motion. He trusts in it where his brother had failed to see that wisdom. He saw in it the only hope of bringing his people from a place of despair to a, a, a place where they might actually be able to salvage the city of Minas Tirith against the wrath of Mordor. But you know, Boromir's position makes sense, given his premises. We don't want to be too hard on him. And yet Faramir, he understood, he had a deeper wisdom that Boromir didn't have, and that allowed him to make the right choice where Boromir had made the wrong one. And yeah, this is the second decision too. I think I only talked about one. The second one is when he has mercy on Gollum. At Frodo's request, he chooses not to kill Gollum, even though he saw in Gollum a great danger, not only to himself, but to the men who depended upon the secrecy of the hideout that Gollum had come to, and also because he was concerned about Frodo, being at the mercy of this creature as they went forth on the quest. But again, he echoes for the reader the wisdom of Gandalf. So there's the really famous passage earlier in the book where Frodo says, they see Gollum, and Frodo says, I wish Bilbo had killed him. I wish Bilbo had killed him when he had the chance. And Gandalf looks at him, and Frodo says, he deserves death. He's a wretched creature. And then a famous passage, I've got it right here, so I'll read it. Gandalf, in his wisdom, decides, no, he may deserve death. He says, deserves it. I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. And then he goes on to say, it may be that Gollum has an important role to play in this quest, one that we cannot see, but let's not be quick to decide for ourselves that he has no role to play. And Faramir, he wasn't there for that conversation, but he, again, sort of echoing Gandalf's wisdom, has a sort of affinity of wisdom and judgment. And he thinks in the same way. And again, his people see this. They see this, including his father Denethor, who insults Faramir, calling him a wizard's pupil. But that, it was intended as an insult, but it's a compliment because Gandalf proved to be wise beyond comprehension in all of those choices.
Yeah. Is there any commentary you'd like to add to just characterizing that type of, as you described, that intersection of justice and mercy? Perhaps I'm misreading, but the posture that Gandalf takes in that conversation, as well as Faramir takes in choosing to spare Gollum, when so many would be quick to end Gollum. I'm just curious if you have any other additional commentary on that in terms of our humanity and our interactions with the world around us.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it, mercy is a necessary consequence of the humility that we all ought to have. And that, just as Gandalf said, even the wise don't see all ends. So let's not be too quick to deal out judgment. Gandalf didn't say this, but I'd like to add, leave it to God. That's the wisdom of, that you can find throughout the scriptures, is that, God can judge. Vengeance belongs to God because God does see all ends and we don't. God sees the inner thoughts and feelings of a person, and we just see the exterior. And so part of that, there's the mercy that arises from, both, I think, Gandalf and Faramir recognizing there's more going on here than we can understand. So let's not meddle any more than we need to. And there's this implicit sort of like faith in some kind of providential guidance. So, people who love Tolkien debate about the extent to which we should take Tolkien at his word when he says it's a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. But this is one of those places where I think it's clearly seen. Like, even though there's not sort of a scheme for a organized religion in Middle-earth or anything like that, there is nevertheless this sort of transcendent frame of reference that many of the characters have, and that they have this understanding that there are higher forces at work in the world than we can see or understand. And both Gandalf and Faramir understand that, which is, I think, why they say, unless it's necessary, let's not take this poor creature's life. Because who knows? Why should we meddle in things that we don't understand? even if it seems wise to us, we know the limits of our wisdom, so let him live. And for all we know, he might have a part to play in bringing about the ultimate end that we desire. So I think there's a humility there, which is always inversely proportional. Like the wisest characters always have the most humility, Gandalf and Faramir recognizing the limits of their knowledge and the fallibility of their judgment, and the least wise ones tend to be very confident that which of course is just true to life. If you look at the history of Western philosophy, it begins with Socrates, who, is told he was the wisest of all. Why was he wise? Well, it puzzled him at first, and then eventually, it comes to light that he's wise because he recognizes how foolish he is, or how little he actually knows. And I think Tolkien understood that well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of wise decisions or foolish decisions, I'm curious if you have any reflections on the interaction that, Faramir and Boromir have with the ring, and how that manifests in the story and further cements their approaches to life.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously Faramir can't be fully understood or appreciated apart from the contrast with his brother, and yet there's a lot to compare them to. So again, I said earlier, I always feel a little sorry for Boromir because he did fail crucially at an important moment, and yet everything else we know about him is that he was valiant, that he was true, that he was loyal. So, I don't know, sometimes people forget this, and they'll say things about Boromir. I'm like, yeah, but he was a great man. He failed, and you know what? Who knows? I might have done the same. So we want to keep that in mind, I think. But while we're on the contrast between the brothers, Faramir, he succeeded where Boromir failed. He discerned rightly where Boromir discerned wrongly what to do when the ring bearer was in their power. And there's an interesting passage in the appendices that's worth reading here, where we get Tolkien's view on the comparison and contrast between Boromir and Faramir. And so in the appendices it says, "So time drew on to the War of the Ring, and the sons of Denethor grew to manhood. Boromir, 5 years the elder, beloved by his father, was like him in face and pride, but in little else. Rather he was a man after the sword of King Ernur of old, taking no wife and delighting chiefly in arms, fearless and strong, but caring little for lore, save the tales of old battles. Faramir the younger was like him in looks, but otherwise in mind. He read the hearts of men as shrewdly as his father, but what he read moved him sooner to pity than to scorn. He was gentle in bearing. He was a lover of lore and of music, and therefore, by many in those days, his courage was judged less than his brother's. But it was not so, except that he did not seek glory in danger without a purpose. He welcomed Gandalf at such times as he came to the city, and he learned what he could from his wisdom. And in this, as in many other matters, he displeased his father." So he displeased his father exactly on the things that made him the man he needed to be to pass the test and to do his part in aiding the quest toward the ultimate salvation of Middle-earth. But that's part of the tragedy of Faramir's character, is that Denethor loved Boromir, and if he loved Faramir, he certainly didn't love him in the same way. He expressed his love in unusual ways.
Yes, yes. And I really appreciate that line there with that he, leaned into Gandalf, as it were, in a way that the others did not. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of his interactions with his father, there are occasions in which he defers to his father's harsh judgment. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, this is the great conflict for Faramir, is his relationship with his father. And Denethor doesn't appreciate Faramir's wisdom, and he wanted somebody like Boromir, who I think, because Denethor trusted in the old might of Gondor, he saw that more clearly embodied in Boromir than in Faramir. But rather than might, it was wisdom that was called for at the moment, and Denethor couldn't see that, and that's why he couldn't see the part that Faramir was playing in bringing new hope to his people. But Faramir, he has this, I mean, just both as a son and as the future steward of of Gondor, he defers to his father in crucial times, and this is probably the one place where Faramir's otherwise subtle and unerring judgment lapses, and it's out of this hurt, this feeling of hurt that Denethor even had said it would have been better to send Faramir, and I knew how it would end, and that is in Boromir's death. He would have rather had Faramir die and be left with Boromir. Obviously, that was deeply hurtful to Faramir. And out of that, it's the one place where his judgment lapses. And instead of doing what needed to be done, what I think he believed needed to be done, what Gandalf believed needed to be done, he, out of deference to his father, went on this, went himself and led a bunch of men onto this military campaign that was doomed to failure. And indeed, I think Denethor knew it was doomed to failure as well, sadly. But he had fallen into despair, Denethor had, and he was thinking more of how I can salvage some kind of glorious end out of the downfall of Gondor than about how I can make room for some hope that there might be a future for the men of Gondor and for the city of Minas Tirith. So yeah, I mean, it's an error in judgment, but one thing that's worth pointing out about this is that this comes out of a positive impulse in Faramir's character, his deference, his willingness to submit to the authority of others. Because, of course, he becomes the steward after his father dies. And his father, and we get hints that Boromir would have been the same way to some degree, they had come to think, well, the stewards, there have been generations and generations of stewards, and where are the kings? What are they doing all this time while we're doing the hard work and making the sacrifices necessary to rule the city and to protect the realm of men? And you can kind of see from their perspective. They're like, how many generations does it take before we become the rightful kings and our sons become the rightful heirs to the throne at Minas Tirith? But Faramir, he's very willing to give up the authority and the power that he's waited so long to take on himself as the steward of Gondor. And when Aragorn comes, it's this deference to a higher authority that Faramir it's one of his great moments. He's got many great moments, but it's one of his great moments. Aragorn comes and he is welcomed into the city, and Faramir, without question, he's ready to give that and to then take his place beneath Aragorn. In humility, he stands forth as a truly great man. And of course, Aragorn says, well, hold on, not yet. We're going to do this a different way. And it goes, first to Frodo and then to Gandalf and then to Aragorn as, to acknowledge the place that they've had in the saving of Middle-earth from the threat of Mordor. But then what does Faramir do? He's happy to just go off and be a prince of Ithilien, which is a gift that realm was a gift that Aragorn gave to him, but live in relative obscurity with Eowyn and be happy. And there's this sense that his reverence for life, that he wouldn't even harm a beast, is expressed in these beautiful passages where he and Eowyn are sort of devoted to cultivating living things, growing things and healing. And we also see it in his comment, one of his great comments where he's trying to understand the hobbits, who they are and what they're about. And he says to Sam about the Shire, he says that must be a really wonderful country, a place where gardeners are held in high honor. And it just shows something of his humility and his values and what really matters to him, especially in light of the fact that the other members of his family succumbed to the allure of power, whereas he didn't, and so he was ready. He was the right man to hand off the long line of stewardship back to the rightful heir, the king of Gondor, to Aragorn. So yeah.
Such an impressive character. And I don't know if you've ever have you taken any stab at fiction writing yourself?
A little bit. I like to write alliterative verse. It's not very good, so don't ask me to show it to you. But I like to write fiction.
Well,
and
maybe someday I can coax you into sharing it. But I only reason I ask that is I have written a few novels, and there are characters, and I'm setting up a question that I have about Tolkien's correspondence. I believe there's a point in which he describes Faramir as a character who sort of wrote himself into the story. I don't know
Mhm.
if that's accurate, but I believe that's what my research found.
Yes, that's right.
And I've experienced that. In
Mhm.
fact, the very first novel I ever wrote, I was just on an airplane, and this scene of a boy out in front of a Walmart came to me, and the story followed. But
Yeah.
I'm curious as to Tolkien's take and presentation on how Faramir came to be a part of his work.
Yeah. Tolkien often talked about things just coming to him. He was sort of passive in the process, at least in his own portrayal of his creative process. Whether the story was more complicated than that, of course, is a question we could discuss, but undoubtedly at least true to some degree that there was some element of inspiration. And he does say that about Faramir. Let's see, I have it here. Tolkien says that Faramir showed up unexpectedly. Here's the quote. He says, a new character has come on the scene. I'm sure I did not invent him. I did not even want him, though I like him. And there he came, walking into the woods of Ithilien. That's in a letter. I think that's to his son, Christopher. Um, and then he says, Faramir, the brother of Boromir, and he's holding up the catastrophe by a lot of stuff about history of Gondor and Rohan, with some very sound reflections, no doubt, on martial glory and true glory. But if he goes on much more, a lot of them will have to be removed to the appendices, which I read a section from the appendices where he apparently had to move some of that a little bit earlier. So yeah, that is interesting. And I mean, it makes sense. I think probably, again, I'm not speaking from the position of somebody who has accomplished anything in the realm of fiction, but I would imagine the greatest achievements in the writing of fiction are like that. They're inspiration rather than sort of methodical construction, because that'll always end
Yes.
up with something formulaic or wooden. So Faramir appeared. It's interesting. There's a couple other places where Faramir shows up in the letters of Tolkien, and I looked him up before this conversation because I was interested. And one of the things that Tolkien says, he says, I am not Gandalf, being a transcendent subcreator of this little world. As far as any character is, quote, like me, it is Faramir, except that I lack what all characters possess, let the psychoanalysts note, courage. So Tolkien says that there's something in Faramir that he very much identifies with, that he sees himself in Faramir, except for Faramir's courage. So that's interesting. And then there were a few more that were interesting from the letters. Oh, one other thing is that I don't know what to make of this. I'm sure that there are people out there who could tell you more of the significance of this, but Tolkien talks throughout his letters on a number of occasions about this recurring dream he had of like a great tidal wave coming to subsume everything. It's interesting. He gives that dream to Faramir. So I don't know if that's just because maybe he had made some interconnection between himself and Faramir and, something so like personal and mysterious made its way into Faramir's mind. But that dream is, I thought that was interesting
Yeah,
connection.
very interesting. And it strikes me just now, as you've kind of prefaced the whole conversation with that thought from Chesterton and Lewis with respect to the synthesis of two opposites of a sort. Even with the work that Tolkien has done here, it is a blend truly of uh, inspiration,
Mhm.
as noted with such a thing as Faramir just walking into the woods of Luthien, but also such a methodical, well constructed, framework.
Yeah.
It's almost, yeah. I mean, obviously it's a masterpiece, but that it is both and I think
Yes.
perhaps it is for those willing to endure the type of diligence and effort required to construct such a world that the moments of inspiration come as a
Yeah.
consequence of that immersion. Anyway, those are just
Yeah.
thoughts that come to me.
Well, that's perfectly right. So if you read through Tolkien's letters, you do get at once this sense of, the inspiration where he's just sort of passive and a character just appears and he likes him and he's going to write more about him. And he said this, and I don't know where that came from. This sort of passive sense of it came to him. But then there's also a sort of laborious, painstaking tedium to what's described in Tolkien. As you, in the letters, you get this sense of the process by which he wrote. He brought his philologist's diligence to the work, and was obviously something of a perfectionist about it. And so yeah, there are those two elements. There is the sense in which he is, by a great effort, constructing the story, but he's doing so sort of to refine the inspiration that just it came inexplicably. And it seems like, again, that's probably how it is for people who write great fiction. And since I lack the inspiration, that's probably why I've never produced a piece of fiction worth anything.
Oh,
If
I'm
it was
not
all about
claiming
diligence, I'd be fine, because I can do that. But
I'm not claiming anything great in my work, but at least a few people have read it.
yeah,
Boy, yeah. Well, that I don't want to derail us with a conversation on the creative process and all of that, but I just had recently this conversation between you and I. We're recording this the week before Thanksgiving. It will probably air sometime in the Christmas holidays, second, third week of December. But recently we aired the conversation I had with your friend Holly Ordway, and she discussed Eowyn. And so I'd love to hear your take on Faramir's romance with Eowyn, both the characters, but also its effect within the, development of Middle-earth and the story arc.
Yeah. Had I not picked Faramir, Eowyn actually would have been really high on my list. I think Eowyn is just such a fascinating character, and just, again, I think Tolkien's art as like a novelist reaches its highest pitch in his portrayal of some of these relatively minor characters like Faramir and Eowyn. They're not minor, but they're certainly not in the top tier of the most important or prominent characters. And moreover, I'll say this: I genuinely believe, even though it's brief and suggestive, his handling of the love story between Eowyn and Faramir is as delicate and stunning as any love story in Western literature. So
Wow.
I'll say that. There'll be scoffers. I don't care. I'm happy to defend anybody who wants to. It's just the way that it develops. The only comparison I can think of, but lacking in something of the gravity of Tolkien's telling, is in the best of Jane Austen, where everything seems implausible. Everything seems implausible until the moment everything comes together, and then it's like, well, it was inevitable. Like, it had to happen this way. How could I have thought it was implausible? It's like, it's just beautifully done. And then Eowyn's transformation is, and the role that Faramir plays in it, and vice versa. It's just, I don't know. It's astonishing to me, really. And then the way that for Eowyn, she loves Aragorn, but she really doesn't, and everybody knows that she doesn't. She has, like, Aragorn's like represents some kind of ideal to her, right? He's not a blood human being in her mind. At least that's the way it seems to me. He's the great, future king of Gondor. He's this mighty, powerful warrior, and sort of has a lot of the characteristics that in her own way Eowyn has, but feels frustrated because there's this dynamic of her, the expectations on her as a woman, and the role that she's expected to play, which is not the one that she would choose to play, and all this stuff. And but one of the things that's so brilliant about Tolkien's handling of it is just one little phrase, and it seems insignificant, but when read in its context, it's just devastating. That he talks about this slow process in the Houses of Healing, where Faramir is sort of very gently approaching her over and over again, and she's not yet ready. But it's very clear to me that Faramir understands that she has not yet understood her own mind, and he proceeds with caution because of that. And as he does, there's this moment where sort of inexplicably they see something on the horizon, and all of a sudden they're filled with hope. And of course, they don't know the details, but they feel that the shadow has passed. And Faramir then looks at her and says, I feel it in my heart that we have no more need of despair, that things are going to be okay. And through that she sees him, and she sees all that she saw in Aragorn, but also something else, something that was Tolkien's phrase that he uses. It's like her heart changed in that moment, but not really. It's more she came to know it for the first time, and it's like she had this love and it was misdirected, and she was trying to attach it to Aragorn because he had so many of the qualities that she admired. But it's not that she really loved Aragorn. It's almost as if even before knowing him, that love was meant for Faramir, and then in that moment she finally sees it finds its proper object, or subject rather, and I just think it's wonderfully done. Very
Yeah.
memorable.
Well, I think Holly would probably concur with your opinion. Any other thoughts with respect to Faramir's just approach as you described, and perhaps lessons for young men listening to this conversation?
Yeah.
We could be so bold.
Yeah. Um, I I don't want to repeat what I've already said. I mean, I think it's what stands out most to me is a very specific kind of humility. And if if we're going to go here, probably just as in there's a lot of my friends who are women who read The Lord of the Rings are uniquely compelled by Eowyn, right? And I probably more often than not exclusively, more often than not, it'll be men, maybe especially young men, who are compelled by a character like Faramir, because there is something just uh, deeply. It's all the best of the virtues that are associated with the best forms of masculinity that he embodies, at least in my opinion. But there's also this humility about him, his recognition of his own limits, his, combining this greatness and this striving for greatness, whether as a soldier or a scholar or whatever it is, that continual striving combined with his willingness to just take his place beneath others and to recognize his limits. And that's something that is, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. It's those who give that receive. It's in giving we receive. It's these spiritual sayings of Christ are always echoing in my head when I think of what it is that I think is great about Faramir. And there's a certain kind of glory in his lower station beneath people like Aragorn, right? And he accepts that, and that's what makes it possible. So there's this great description of him that comes from Pippin. The first time Pippin sees Faramir, upon Faramir's return to Gondor, he's just encountered one of the Nazgul and is been nearly pushed to his own demise. But Pippin, first speaks with Faramir, and his own thoughts are: "Here was one with an air of high nobility, such as Aragorn at times revealed, less high perhaps, yet also less incalculable and remote. One of the kings of men born into a later time, but touched with the wisdom and sadness of the elder race. He knew now why Baragon spoke his name with love. He was a captain that men would follow, and that he would follow even under the shadow of the Black Wing." I love that.
Love that. That's, man, I'm inspired. I've got a lot of work to do on myself. Oh my goodness. He is at once a paragon of sorts, and certainly an ideal, and yet there is some humanizing of him. And I'm curious about the way that Tolkien handles that as well, and perhaps any temptation he faced to the ring, and what you make of that.
Yeah. So you said there's a way in which Faramir seems a little bit more humanized than some of the higher, nobler characters, and that's that's part of what makes him an attractive character. And we see that in Pippin's description. He just said, like, there's something greater about Aragorn. It's clearly the Aragorn's the greater of the two, and yet there's also something incalculable and remote about Aragorn. He's almost too high and noble for us to really to really know. And yet Faramir, it's like that high nobility has been brought down to earth a little bit for us, for the rest of us, right? Yeah. And but also, there's another humanizing element, which is in that Faramir, as we've said, he was tempted. Like he wants so badly two things. He wants to please his father, and he wants to defend Gondor against the threat of Mordor, right? And in those two good desires, he's faced with a temptation, and that temptation is the same temptation that both his brother and his father in their own way fell to, which was to use any means to toward a great end. Whereas Faramir understood that you should seek good things, but you have to do it by good means, by the means that are available to you, not by means that will undermine the goodness of the things that you seek, such as the ring, or the Palantirs, or whatever, whatever other good. Well, the ring's not a good thing, but like the Palantir has a real legitimate purpose. It was once used to facilitate communication in the realm of Gondor, but it was a dangerous thing that Denethor didn't recognize the dangers. So yeah, Faramir is humanized in that way, but also we don't want to overstate it and say that he was too tempted. I think this is one place where the films show him as being more on the fence than he was in the books. That they show Faramir as being, and I understand they're trying to recall to us the incident with Boromir, where the temptation of the ring became too much, and he tried to take it from Frodo, and then Faramir has Frodo in his power. I understand what they're trying to do, but in the book, while clearly Faramir understands the pull of that, he understands that there is a temptation there in the ring. First of all, he says before he even knows the specifics, he just knows that there's an heirloom of great power. He says he doesn't want it mentioned again. He doesn't want to hear more about it. And then even once he finds out what it is, and Frodo and Sam are afraid he's going to do the same thing Boromir did, he says resolutely, and then he repeats it again later, I would not take this thing if it laid beside, on the side of the highway. If I came across it and it was just sitting there, I would keep walking. Yeah, that's Faramir. So while he might have, felt something, some kind of temptation, he was forearmed against it so that he was able to act in a principled manner and say, it doesn't matter what I feel. I know that it would be better for me to leave it in the ditch on the side of the road than to take it even for good purposes, even to try to bring hope to the people of Gondor and to defeat the forces in Mordor. So yeah, he's humanized, but he's also resolute and principled, and probably the most humanizing element is in that sense is his desire to please his father and his father's contempt for him.
Yeah, yeah. Boy, I have just been so blessed by your sharing all the different thoughts and reflections, Landon. I really appreciate it. Is there any sort of lasting thoughts or ideas you'd like to share as we conclude our conversation?
Really, I'd just like to thank you for having me on again. This is great. You're doing a great thing, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Today's episode of The Plunge is sponsored by a poetical fragment from The Lord of the Rings, Book 4, The Window of the West, in which Faramir tells about his love to his dear Minas Tirith. I am not going to attempt to read the Sindarin or the Quenya because I am not fluent in Elvish. Perhaps someone out there is, and if you are, I would love to have you record this poem in the native tongue. I shall do my best to do it justice in the English. And so it goes. I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of the men of Numenor. I don't love sword radiant for sharpness its, nor arrow for swiftness its, nor warrior for glory his. I only love this, what they defend, the tower city of West men. Thank you so much, Faramir, for that incredible poem, for reminding us that no great deed is done based on the hate one has for the thing before it, but only for the love one has for the thing behind it. And for your sponsorship. Thanks, Faramir.